In our more than 400 days at sea, we've enjoyed over 250 port days.
And 80% of those have come in just in the last 3 years since we retired.
And what we've realized is if you're planning to do your port days the way we used to, you might be doing it wrong.
Hi, I'm Jan.
And I'm Tracy. And in this video, we're going to try and help you make better decisions about what to do when your cruise ship is in port.
Because if you're like most cruisers, you pick your itinerary for your cruise based upon the ports the ship's going to go to. In fact, according to the Cruise Lines International Association, also known as CLIA, the top reason that people choose to cruise is their ability to visit multiple destinations.
And that's certainly the reason we love to cruise, as our cruises have taken us to places like the Marina Bay Sands in Singapore, the Garibaldi Glacier in Chile, and Petra, Jordan.
So really the question we're going to be answering in this video is, how can you make the most out of the destinations your cruise goes to?
So the first step is to stop focusing on only what your cruise line offers you as an excursion. We used to do this, and honestly, we think it's a mistake.
Yeah, and it's not even because of the cost. Well, although it is just because of the cost, which we're going to get to, but because, quite frankly, doing this can seriously limit the experience you're going to have in those ports.
And one of our most unforgettable port days was an overnight stop when we were in Perth, Australia. We decided to visit the Lancelin sand dunes, and we got to go sandboarding down the dunes.
Hey Trace, how was it?
That was fun, but I'm done. Finished. Followed by a sunset in the Pinnacles in Namberg National Park and an evening of stargazing through telescopes. It was spectacular. Here's the thing, none of that was even an option on our cruise line's excursion list. We only got to experience that because we looked outside of what the cruise ship was offering.
And that's why we believe that the first step in your planning really should be to take stock of what you love about travel. Is it the history, the art, going to the beaches, taking part in the local food, getting those great shopping in, or really experiencing the epic scenery?
And once you know what you love, do some research on the port and the surrounding region. What's it known for? What's unique about it? What fits your interests?
These days, it's easier than ever. Now, actually, the reason why we got the idea to start this YouTube channel is because we actually do exactly this. We used to go onto YouTube, watch travel videos, just to be able to get an idea of what we want to do when we get to a particular port. Now, beyond YouTube, there are lots of great guidebooks, such as those by Rick Steves, Lonely Planet. You can go to Wikipedia, where it has entries with great summaries that highlight the tourist options that you have in a different area.
And if you're on the internet, you can go to port forums on Cruise Critic, and that's a helpful area where cruises share what's worked for them.
And just to reinforce that we're tech savvy with all this AI, and yes, you can actually use ChatGPT to help identify those special experiences wherever you're going to be going.
So after this initial research, you should have a solid idea of what you want out of that port. So for example, if you're going to Barcelona, maybe it is a visit to La Sagrada Familia.
Or maybe you actually rather would relax and people watch along the La Rambla with some food and drink.
But by this point, you've likely found several things that really excite you about the port, and that's the foundation for choosing the right type of excursion.
So let's walk through the 4 main options you have to be able to enjoy your port day. Now, we've tried them all, we continue to use them all, and each one has its own place depending upon its destination and your own comfort level.
Think of these options as being on a spectrum of being really independent travel to being very dependent on the cruise line.
First up is DIY, or do it yourself. This is where you just step off the ship, you make your own way, you don't have a guide, no schedule other than your own desires.
Now, if that sounds too adventurous, don't worry. We'll cover some more options in a moment.
However, for us, when the conditions are right, that is absolutely our favorite way to be able to explore a port.
So this really works well in walkable ports, places like Barcelona, Spain, or Tallinn, Estonia, or Old San Juan, Puerto Rico. And this is where the city is right outside the terminal.
But DIY, or do-it-yourself travel, also includes doing things such as hopping on the metro in Singapore, taking a cab to a private beach in Cozumel, or even catching a train from Civitavecchia into Rome.
And the best part of this is the freedom that you get. You get to see what you want. You get to spend the time where you think it matters most to you, and you usually spend a lot less money doing that.
And what is great is because you don't have to wait for the cruise director to call your excursion group to the theater and then be escorted to your buses. Unless it's a tender port, you just walk right off the ship and start exploring, getting so much more out of your port day.
And a perfect example of this was our port day in Shimizu, Japan. So we grabbed a taxi to the Nihondara Plateau Kyoto, and from there we took a short cable car ride down to one of the most historic shrines in Japan.
Now, we explored at our own pace. We enjoyed the peaceful grounds and near silence almost, and we were already heading back to the ropeway just as the cruise ship excursion buses started to arrive. And it wasn't just one or two buses, it was waves of people. Massive tour groups are lining up for the cable cars, absolute pandemonium.
And I'll guarantee you that their experience was not as relaxed nor as serene as ours was.
Nor was it as cheap. Our DIY experience for the two of us cost just $50. That's $20 for the taxi and $30 for the admission to the temple and the cable car. Now, in comparison, those who took the ship excursion, that ship excursion did exactly what Tracey and I did, paid $90 per person or $180 for the two. And we saw everything they did without the crowds, without the aggravation, and all at our own pace.
But it also means that you are 100% responsible for your adventure in port. You're going to need to do your own additional planning, not only about where to go, but you also have to research on the places you visit and the things that you're going to see. And if you misjudge the timing of your time in port, there is no safety net. The ship is not going to wait for you, and you might have far more time in port than you ever would have thought you wanted.
Now, we've had some great DIY days, but we've also had a couple days we were back to the ship a little closer to the parts than we would have wanted. Now, what we think is an adjacent form of DIY travel is using taxi tours. Here, we're not talking about simply using a taxi to get to a beach or a museum that you've already decided to visit, but rather using the taxi as the experience itself.
So in many ports, you're going to find drivers lined up right outside the cruise terminal offering to take you around.
And this can be a blast. Sometimes you find a great local who's going to give you that off the beaten path experience you've never expected. For example, in Penang, Malaysia, for just $120 for the two of us, our driver gave us an experience we'll never forget. A great experience that we'll never forget.
But these taxi tours also are the riskiest because there's usually no formal company behind them, and you're not going to know the route or whether they're going to manage their time well. And sometimes they're going to sneak you into shopping areas and stops for the commissions that they get, or they're going to take you farther than expected or to restaurants where they're going to get a kickback.
But it's important, though, to make sure to set the expectations clearly with the taxi driver. You want to make sure that they know how long you want to be out, what you want to see, and most importantly, when you need to be back to the ship. Not when all the board is, but when you need to be back to the ship by the time that you feel comfortable with. Also, always negotiate the price up front, and quite frankly, be willing to walk away if it seems too expensive, and especially if it just doesn't feel right. Also, you need to keep in mind that although you're going to be paying the taxi driver to move you, take you around to these different places, you will still be responsible for paying any of the entrance fees to the locations you might visit. Taxi driver is not going to pay these. Despite this, we've had some wonderful taxi tours. For example, beyond their time in Penang, Malaysia, when we were in Samoa, probably is our favorite, with Fred, who was made it feel like we were just in his car of a new friend who was just showing his island.
Then there's also the tours that are being offered within the terminal. And if you've been to most major cruise ports, you know exactly what we're talking about, as a route from the ship to the exit of the port will undoubtedly take you right by all of these tour vendors.
Now, taking a tour of one of these vendors tends to be less risky than taking a tour with one of the taxi drivers outside the terminal.
And that's because in order for these vendors to operate within the security area of the terminal, they usually have to pay a pretty hefty license to be in the port. And there are no guarantees provided to be returned in time to the ship, regardless of what the vendor is going to tell you. But they risk losing their lucrative license to operate within the port if they begin missing departures times with their guests. And this gives an incentive for these operators to have you back in port on time.
For example, we had a great experience like this in Invergordon, in Scotland, where we hired a guide, just Tracey and I, that was right into the port terminal, and it turned into a fantastic day of discovering northern Scotland, visiting a wonderful, beautiful castle, getting some local perspectives, and visiting several Scotch distilleries. It was just Tracey, me, and our guide at a fraction of what the ship would have charged for a similar private experience.
So a key problem with both taxi and terminal tours is that often you won't know what's available until you get off the ship. So this is where the arranging the tour with a private tour company online does pay off sometimes. There's many online portals that you can use, such as TripAdvisor, and we've had really good luck with things like Viator and Tours by Locals. Although you can often find direct contacts with local guides on forums such as Cruise Critic and Facebook, they're going to save you the booking fees that are charged by these online platforms.
Now, there are several advantages of arranging a private tour before you're sailing. First of all, you have a plan for what you're going to be doing even before the ship actually leaves on embarkation day. Second, you can search for exactly the experience you want. This also includes whether you want to go on a private guided experience or you want to go on a bus with other passengers. And usually, if you are booking a private tour, you can fine-tune with the company or guide to see exactly what you want to see. And then third, these tend to be less expensive than what you're going to be finding on ship excursions.
So examples of how we've used these are our evening excursion, the Pinnacles, within the Namberg National Park outside of Perth, and that's one that we booked on Viator. And we've used Tours by Local for a private tour during our post-cruise exploration of the Iguazu Falls in Argentina and Brazil. Both of them were unforgettable experiences, and we would not have received this through a routine cruise excursion.
Now, while the tours from the port terminal vendor cannot guarantee your return to the ship, many of the online tour companies will offer a guarantee, but it's important to understand that this guarantee is not the same as what you're going to get with a ship excursion. The ship is still going to leave you in port if you cannot return to the ship in time. However, many of these tours will guarantee your expenses to transport you to meet the ship at its next port.
It's also important to understand that there is a risk with booking in advance. So providers like Viator do offer free cancellations outside of 24 hours, but if weather prevents your ship from docking or tendering, you could lose your fee. We've been mostly fortunate with working something out, but there have been times, such as our visit to Ishigaki, Japan, where we ate the expense when the ship just couldn't get us on shore in time.
However, the safest option, and it's the easiest that's available to you, is to book an excursion through the ship. You're automatically going to be refunded if the ship is unable to make port, and best yet, if for some reason your cruise excursion is late to the ship, with very few exceptions, your ship is still going to be there when your excursion makes it back to port.
So for example, in Busan, Korea, our ship waited in port for 2 additional hours when one of its cruise excursions got caught in traffic.
Yeah, and in fact, there was actually, it was a group of Korean high schoolers that actually was in a band that was playing to be able to see us off the ship. As we departed, they were just out there just playing for 2 hours as you go, as we're waiting for that excursion to get back. But it's just another example of the fact that for most cases, the ship is going to wait for a cruise excursion. So you really do have that nice security blanket when you take a ship's excursion. Now, when you start looking at ship cruise excursions, the most common is going to be in those 40 or 60 passenger buses. But many lines have what is called those small group excursion types. For example, Oceania offers what they call the Oceania Exclusive or OE excursions, and the Regent offers something like the Regent Choice excursions. These limit the excursions to just 16 people, so you get more of a personalized experience.
But as you would expect, these will generally be a lot more expensive. But if you're willing to pay, most lines will have a private tour option for many ports where you can customize what you want to see while you're in port. And again, they tend to be very, very expensive.
And there is also the option to make no choice at all and just stay on the ship. If we've been to a port many times before and there is no longer anything that really makes our heart go pitter-patter, we might elect just to spend the day enjoying the ship and everything it has to offer while everyone else is in port.
So these are all the options of what to do in port, and we've done them all. So how do we choose what we're doing in port on our own? And when do we feel is it justified to pay for the higher expense of a cruise excursion?
And quite frankly, for us, it really comes down to a matter of risk. In ports with lower risk, we are more likely to do a DIY excursion.
While visiting some locations carry more risk, and then we'll elect to do the cruise excursion.
Yet it's important to understand that what might seem too much risk to one person may be less risky to others. This certainly is true as your travel experience continues. Even still, I'm actually still more risk adverse than Tracey is, and we both might be less concerned by risk in some ports than others who may be on their first cruise and certainly their first time out of the country. So you need to have an idea of what the level of risk that you feel comfortable with and make your decision based upon your own risk level.
We look at risk as a composite of several different factors, and those include things like your security, the language, the currency, and maybe the logistics.
And first and foremost, we look to see how safe the port area is and the location we want to visit is. Generally, the port area of most of the cruise itinerary is going to be safe. Usually, if it's not safe, usually the cruise is not going to go there. But once you leave the port area, this can be a completely different story. For example, our World Cruise stopped in Cologne, Panama. And although there are shops and restaurants within the port area, and the port area is actually really safe, the state itself is actually rather poor and quite frankly is the epicenter of crime within the country. So this is why we elected to take a taxi that we got from within inside the security area, and then we had them take us to the canal locks, and we had a wonderful time.
So to make your own assessment, there are tools available to you. The U.S. State Department maintains a set of travel advisories for all countries, as well as other helpful information. Additionally, the UK and Canada have similar resources from their government websites. Many cruise lines will have this thing called the Port Talk, where you can ask about where to go in the port and what to avoid and whether it's safe to wander at all. For us, there's also just that gut sense that if it doesn't feel right, we defer to taking a safer mode of exploration.
Now, the second risk factor really has to do with the logistics, which is, can we reliably get to where we want to go and be comfortable that we're going to get back to the ship in time? Now, Tracey and I have a rule that we must be back to the ship an hour before the all-aboard time, although there has been a couple of times that we've kind of pushed this a bit. And if we simply want to visit a museum in the port city or walk to the markets, never straying more than maybe an hour walk from the ship, this really becomes a low DIY proposition, especially if the port has a good metro system and reliable taxi service. Although we need to keep in mind that of the total time that the ship is going to be in port and when that time that we have to be on the ship is. And we also, because we need to make sure that there's enough time for us to travel to the attraction we want to see, experience that attraction, and then be able to get back to the ship in time.
Of course, if our next port on the cruise is in the same country or in some place like the European Union, we might be a little bit more adventurous. And at that point, we might decide to rent a car in Cinque Terre from La Spezia or take the train from Civitavecchia to Rome, which is over an hour away. This is because we know that even if everything went wrong, we could easily take a train that evening or the next morning to the next port and catch up with the ship again.
However, not everywhere can we take that risk. For example, when we visited Aqaba, Jordan, different story. The only way we were going to go to Petra was going to be on a ship excursion, because the risk of taking even a private excursion to travel to 2 hours from Aqaba to Petra and then coming back and then risking having vehicle troubles, quite frankly, that was a risk level that was beyond what we were comfortable with.
So the other risk factors that are not quite as dire as the security or logistics, but still represent a risk to the convenience in a port. One of these is the language. While we both speak a foreign language, our languages really don't help us in many ports.
So we always try to be aware of exactly how far our English is going to get us. Now, some places like Singapore, it's a no-brainer. The official language in Singapore is English, so it's not an issue at all. That's very, very easy. And while in Europe, you may have several different languages, but we also still find it's very easy to navigate in English very easily, with us only having to whip out Google Translate on our phones for just a few circumstances.
And then there's places like Japan, where we found nearly all the signage to only be in Japanese, and it was far fewer places where anybody spoke English, which was surprising to us. But it didn't stop us from going out and putting nearly 40,000 steps exploring cities like Osaka, Japan. But we understand how this might be beyond many people's risk tolerance.
Now, the next risk actually is a matter of currency and the ability to pay. Now, Europe is easy, as almost everywhere is going to be able to take an American credit card, and even if we have to pay in cash, it's just a matter of using euros, which can be taken and used anywhere in any of the ports we have during a European cruise.
But then there's places like Da Nang, Vietnam, where it seemed that nobody took credit cards and everything had to be in Vietnamese currency. And while we were able to pull money out of the ATM, or we could have ordered currency from our bank before leaving, this still might be a reason to use a prearranged tour instead of taking a taxi or venturing out into port on our own.
So when we are looking at those four risk factors together, which are logistics, security, language, and currency, they really become a filter for us on how to choose which is the right excursion type to do.
So, for example, if the security and the logistics are solid, then we know the language or can easily navigate, then a DIY day is often perfect for us. But if the security is questionable, or if the logistics are complex, like long travel travel times with no backup, then we lean towards booking through the ship, even if it is more expensive.
Then those ports are kind of in the middle area. For example, if the safety is fine, but the language barrier is high, or the currency is tricky, that's where we might think about having a private guide or a small group arranged ahead of time. That way someone else is smoothing out the details, so we're just able to enjoy the day.
And if the logistics are straightforward, but we want a little bit of flexibility and maybe a little bit of local charm, then we'll take a taxi tour or a terminal vendor, and that might just be the sweet spot.
See, no matter which option you choose, the goal is the same. Make the most out of your port day without adding unnecessary stress. Now, to see an example of a port day done DIY style, watch this video, and as always, keep on traveling.